Hey guys, welcome back to the American Experiment Podcast. My name is Grace Keating. As always, I'm here with Kathryn Johnson.
Hi, Grace.
And today we are joined in studio by Bill Walsh. Big, beautiful Bill Walsh.
No, but we're talking about the big, beautiful Bill today, but not me.
It was an on-theme introduction,
okay, good,
I think, with today's episode. Yeah. It's been a while since we had you in. We're doing sort of a stop the tape adjacent program today because we're only playing one clip at the very end. I don't think I'll say what that is yet. It's pretty fun. But most of our stop the tape-ish content is actually on articles that have been coming out in Minnesota from legacy media around the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, so kind of like a stop the presses, but not the same meaning as like stop the presses.
Right. We're stopping something. We're stopping one of us reading the article.
But yeah, I think busting BBB myths. Ooh. That's the theme of today.
Yes, yeah. Because there's been a lot of mistruths, and a lot of the time it's straight up lies. It's completely misrepresenting what the big beautiful bill does. But a lot of the time the mistruths are more in what they're not saying, what they're not telling you about these statements. That's pretty accurate, I would say.
It's typical. I mean, there's two sides to every discussion these days. You know, I suppose a Democrat side, a Republican side, or a liberal side and a conservative side. So that when you look at a huge piece of legislation passing like the big beautiful bill, first of all, it's like what do you focus on in the bill? Although I think these articles we're going to talk about today get that right mostly. They start with the tax cuts, which is the biggest part of the bill. But the messaging has been typical of a lot of issues out there. The heartstrings, compassionate or empathy messages. And, especially around Medicaid. And we talk a lot about that. Actually talked a lot about that in our Doge Minnesota tour. The cuts that we recommend in Minnesota, and we put that together way before the big beautiful bill passed, really outline how Minnesota can comply with what the big beautiful bill is telling us to do in Medicaid. But let's just start with the first one because it's so indicative. This is Jill Burkham, Star Tribune editorial writer. So she's one of the people that writes for the opinion page. And then occasionally they write their own columns under their name. So Jill Burkham is a healthcare specialist. That's what she talks about a lot. So the premise is it's awesome. It's typical. It's a great example because the headline is Medicaid cuts in big beautiful bill will hit Minnesota nursing homes hard. And then the photo is, literally a grandma in a nursing home with her hands on a pillow. So the imagery, you read the title, you see the photo, you think, oh, this big beautiful bill is going to kick grandma out of the nursing home.
Yeah.
Which is one of the big myths of the entire messaging of the bill, that the Medicaid cuts are going to hit, they're just indiscriminate across the board cuts to Medicaid. So everybody that's on Medicaid health care for the poor is essentially what the program is supposed to be doing. That's the premise. I'll just read the lead too.
And they know that most people who pass by this article will not get past the
Correct.
Title and the image just because there's too much content. Most people are scrolling, but they get the message quickly that this is cuts to nursing homes.
Or if you just read the lead, and she's just, she's speaking from the heart about her father, which is great. I mean, you want to bring that in to your writing. One of the most difficult moments in my dad's long and losing battle with Parkinson's disease is how suddenly his care needs escalated. He'd lived with his debilitating condition for 14 years at home with my mom providing assistance, but that changed after he was hospitalized in late February. His needs were now beyond our family's capacity. It was time to move him into a skilled nursing facility. So the whole lead is my dad, Alzheimer's, or is it Parkinson's?
That's, a story very familiar to many people reading this, some version of this in their own lives, so immediately tugging at those heartstrings.
The big beautiful bill must have impacted her dad and her family and the cost of care, right? Well, a few paragraphs down, we get her own writing. While the congressional cuts generally take more direct aim at younger people on Medicaid. Okay, wait a minute now. So you lead with your dad and his heartstring tugging story, but you admit halfway through the article that it's not going to affect him at all, and it won't affect him at all.
Right, because that's not what this bill did. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, literally the next line, and she tries to justify tying these two pieces together by saying, quote, healthcare is an ecosystem, and cuts in one area can have ripple effects system-wide. That is her justification for saying, this bill is going to kick my father out of his nursing home, and he's going to lose his coverage, and then also this bill actually doesn't impact the group that I'm telling you it does, but healthcare is an ecosystem, so it's probably going to affect it anyway.
It might.
So in theory, it could maybe.
Maybe if I say it will happen.
So yeah,
it's just ridiculous.
Reality is it's not, and
the messaging on this is so frustrating too. I mean, the line above it just says Minnesota State Medicaid Director estimated that the reconciliation bill will result in a loss of $500 million annually for this program. This is a sum not easily backfilled with state dollars. No, duh. Why would we be trying to fill that sum with state dollars? These are good cuts being made at the federal level. This premise that, the federal government is taking this money, Minnesota taxpayers have to step up and supplement it. We should reject that premise, that line of thinking immediately.
100%. That's the theme throughout the bill.
Yeah.
That these are all righteous and good spending programs that can never be cut. And that
it's sacred
so
spending.
If the federal government doesn't fund it, well, we're going to have to just come up with the funding ourselves. Or we could rethink whether those dollars need to flow to those people in that way, which is what Congress and the president did.
And Peter Nelson for us wrote a whole paper about this, cuts that could be made to Medicaid that don't affect people. Literally, that would be good cuts that people who need care can still get their care. And the cuts are to things like waste and fraud and abuse of the system. There are so many things going on in these government systems that can be cut, and they're not hurting people. So this idea that, we're killing off grandma and grandpa is completely false.
The raids you saw last week on by the federal government here in Minneapolis on housing stabilization grants, that's Medicaid.
Yeah.
Under Medicaid, which is supposed to be health care for the poor, we were doing housing, not even housing, just counseling on how to get good housing stabilization grants. That was Medicaid fraud happening in our state. So lots of work we do before we get to the grandpa on Parkinson's transitioning to a nursing home.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to another article. Star Tribune, we'll stay with the Star Tribune. So this is their overall article soon after the bill passed. Title is How Will Trump's Big Bill Affect Minnesota? And they do a good job starting with the tax cuts. So that's at least good news. They at least admit that the big part of the bill is the tax cuts. And by the way, just they use the word a flurry of tax cuts. That's true. I mean, the rate cuts from 2017 stay in place. They increase the child tax credit. They cut taxes on tips. They cut taxes on overtime.
Yeah, where am I supposed to be mad? This is all great.
Flurry sounds like exactly what I want to see. Taxes. I can't even see them. There's so many.
They increased the SALT deduction, which is the state and local taxes deduction that people in states like Minnesota, which have high local income taxes and local and sales taxes, or they help us accomplish. So I think it's I had this argument with somebody that's a great thing because that really killed me in Minnesota or Wisconsin or New York, high tax states. Well, yes. Happy for you that the deduction has been restored and you get a bigger reduction on the state taxes you pay. But think about all the other people in states that don't have huge high income taxes. They're essentially we're what's the word? We're underwriting the high taxes in Minnesota and New York with federal tax deductions, while other states don't have high income taxes and somehow take care of their population without it. So I didn't hate the SALT a change in 2017, but this is really good for Minnesotans that the deduction has been increased back. The higher standard deduction, which was put in place in 2017, which benefited a lot of people, by the way, made tax filing simpler for so many people because you don't have to worry about itemized deductions if the standard deduction is high enough that it trumps it. So makes your tax filing very easy. And then, of course, the corporate tax cuts are now permanent too, which gives business certainty in their economic future, which means they can grow jobs, they can do things. So at least these articles mostly start with the good.
Sure. But even though they're trying to frame it as also at the same time kind of bad.
Yeah.
But the stuff they're listing is all extremely positive and supported by most Americans.
Yeah, it's like a myth, too. They say in here somewhere the White House claims that if Congress had failed to act, Americans would have seen a $4 trillion tax hike at year's end. That's not like what the White House is claiming. That's just true. That's what would happen.
Numbers. Yeah.
That's just what would happen because the
tax
tax
cuts
and bills would have expired from before. They renewed the tax cuts. Why is that the White House's claim?
Really heartbreaking, cutting journalism from the Star Tribune.
That we're seeing another that qualifying language is fascinating. It's just the liberal bias that they sneak in. Here's another myth though in this article in the strip. They go on and they talk about, I've seen this a lot. They characterize the bill as, well, it's bad for the poor, good for the rich. Very overgeneralized. And in order to say that, because the tax cuts I just laid out affect everybody, poor and rich. But if you take the entire group of people and you say this is a definition of the poor, and you lump them as a group, And then you talk about the Medicaid cuts we're going to talk about in a minute, where people are not going to be able to be on Medicaid anymore because there are going to be work requirements. So people who don't work that are on getting Medicaid might not get it anymore. So that brings down the entire group.
Sure.
But if you're a working poor and you're not on a government assistance program, you're going to benefit big time from the big beautiful bill because
Right.
you're going to get a tax cut, all the tax cuts we just talked about. But if you're in a group that includes people getting government assistance,
Who
so
don't need it, who
your
can be
group
working.
is going to do worse off. So they try to say that the poor are going to be worse off. Well, as a group, I suppose on the bottom line they might be, but your average person working and not making a ton of money is going to benefit from the big beautiful bill. So that's another big myth. They write economists at the Yale Budget Lab, we should check that source, say the reconciliation bill would result in a nearly 3% decline in income for people in the bottom quarter of American earners. By comparison, the lab says the top 1% of Americans would see a 2% or $30,000 increase in income. So again, they're using those big groups and making assumptions of which group are you in, what's going to happen to you. But if you're paying taxes, you're gonna benefit.
Yeah, yeah. And again, these are not people getting kicked off who actually need assistance. This is just saying if you are able to work, we are not going to give you government assistance to sustain your lifestyle. This is just ridiculous.
All right, here's more of that language that Kathryn just mentioned. They start a paragraph talking about food stamp cuts. We're still in the Star Tribune article here. To pay for dropping government revenue, the bill cuts government services. Well, wait a minute. They're not connected. We're not cutting SNAP funding, which is food stamps, to pay for dropping government revenue. I suppose they assume if you don't require people to pay into the tax code, that's dropping government revenue. They're not connected.
Yeah, it feels like a big connection they're drawing there completely on their own.
And the bill cuts government services because we should spend less in that area. And the Congress has made a decision to do that. They didn't do it because they had to, because they wanted to sustain the tax cuts. Tax cuts also good policy. So
and to pay for dropping government revenue. I would like government revenue to continue to drop, like continue dropping, take less of my taxes. Like that's not an inherently bad thing that government's revenue is dropping.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And their source for this is the Congressional Budget Office, which historically has not credited tax cuts for growth in income to government. They just say, well, that's going to be less money for the government when we cut taxes. They never talk about the effect of more money in people's hands, more economic activity, which does lead to more growth in revenue to government. So I don't like the source of that quote, and that's everywhere in this bill, that the bill is going to cost a lot of money because they just assume the tax cuts are going to be a dollar for dollar net loss to government. So this is the SNAP thing, and SNAP, along with Medicaid, we're going to talk about. They're going to cut food stamps. Well, we're going to require able-bodied, single working people to have a work requirement before they get food stamps. Our polling in Minnesota shows, or the Thinking Minnesota poll shows, wide support for that. 80% support for that.
Very common sense.
Work requirements, very, very supported in Minnesota. Common sense. Not children in the home, not elderly, not disabled, but able-bodied people that can work, single, should be working or volunteering or going to school, and not even full time, but make an effort.
Where does it say? Does it say somewhere you should be working 80 hours a week?
80 hours a month. 80 hours.
Oh, sorry, a month. A week
Community
would be a
engagement.
lot. But
Yeah. That's a part-time job.
Well, and then one of they say
not bad.
one of the reasons SNAP funding is going to leave Minnesota is because the feds will only fully fund SNAP benefits to states with an error rate below 6%. In 2022, Minnesota's error rate with SNAP benefits was over 8%.
Are you surprised by that?
I can't believe they even put that in the article. Honestly, that is so embarrassing and completely justifies what the federal government is trying to do here.
So Congress penalized states that don't have their act together and have a huge error rate, which means fraud, waste. Great theme for Minnesota. So we're getting hit because we have not got our arms around our fraud and our waste.
Yeah.
Well, let's improve our fraud and our waste. Let's focus on that instead of crying about a loss of revenue from the government to the federal government for food stamps.
I think that's really smart, too, to have that on the federal government's behalf, because it's really their money that's being wasted when it's handed over to states like Minnesota, They're being so reckless and careless with that federal money. I think it's great that they imposed, limits like this on states like Minnesota, because they shouldn't be so careless with that money.
Well, and one of the directors of these programs tried to justify it by saying, you know, oh yeah, like our error rate's kind of high, but that can be client errors, worker errors, not necessarily fraud. That's still not okay.
Doesn't matter.
I'm still not okay with 8% of our SNAP benefits being lost to worker errors. And that's the problem is its complete lack of care and trying to justify something with that ridiculous line of judgment.
And no one
logic.
ever gets fired.
Right,
Even on the worker air side, no one ever gets fired. That's a big problem in Minnesota. So getting to the Medicaid cuts, now in this big, beautiful bill article in the Star Tribune, they do write people ages 19 to 64 will have to meet community engagement requirements, such as working or doing community service at least 80 hours per month. So I say, yay, that's great. That's good. The next thing is another big myth that you're hearing, or a big talking point, is that you're going to hear about onerous paperwork requirements. Counties are going to have these paperwork requirements that federal government's requiring. States must start checking recipients' eligibility twice a year instead of once. First of all, Minnesota's not even doing once. We are so bad at checking eligibility. I think we're going to have Matt Dean on here soon to go deep into this, but we could save $1 billion if we just made sure that we're only giving benefits to those people that deserve them fairly and that live in the state, that are still alive, that haven't improved their economic situation, which is the point. Hey, we're going to help you out while you're in a tough spot. But when you improve your economic situation, you're no longer eligible. We're going to check that twice a year to make sure that we're only giving money to the people that deserve it. That frees up money for the people that need it. It's not. We're not talking about cutting the entire program. So opponents of the changes say bureaucratic hurdles from work requirements and increased eligibility checks will cause qualified people to lose care.
No, it won't.
That's not a reason not to do it, first of all. So the alternative is, well, if we require these checks, some people aren't going to be able to hand in the paperwork or come in and prove that they still belong on the program. So we should just not do that and give everybody the program forever and not have eligibility checks. That's not the answer. These are good changes from the federal government. These are not even cuts to Medicaid. These are saying give the money to the people that deserve it and get rid of your fraud and your error rates and check eligibility. And again, this was in our DOJ presentation before this bill passed as ways to lower the cost of Medicaid in Minnesota. And here they're saying, yeah, you have to do it. So
and look at all the hoops you have to jump through just to renew your driver's license or get a passport. And I'm not even asking for the government to give me financial assistance. I would expect that there would have to be some paperwork and identification checks going on to get these benefits. Again, this just seems like such a common sense thing. I cannot believe this is not already happening in Minnesota.
We're really bad at this, and it's a culture thing.
Sure.
We talked about this before. The culture in the state agencies under Mark Dayton and now Tim Walz is give the money away. That's what they think they're supposed to do. We want to help people by getting this federal money and giving it away and giving the most we can to everybody. Forget eligibility checks. Well, that's just we can lose some money doing that. That's okay. It's not okay.
And there are so many issues caused when you allow these people to get away with all of these, like the fraud things we're seeing coming out of, starting with Feeding Our Future. Now there's been, what's our fraud tracker up to?
Well, I don't know. We're over 700 million. 700 million.
Okay,
yeah.
over $700 million.
We just added more things to it.
There are so many negatives that come out of just pushing that money out to people who are willingly defrauding our government. I mean, those are not the best kind of people to have, people who are already committing crimes, to have all of that money. Like, it's not just a good thing to give all that money away to whoever wants to take it and whoever's willing to, do a crime to get it.
Yeah.
We're dupes. We got to stop doing that. Okay, energy.
Dupes. Yeah, dupes.
Suckers, dupes, chumps.
Oh, we've been duped.
We've been dupes.
Oh.
We've been duped.
We've been duped.
Yeah.
We are the dupies. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I love it. Let's go to energy. This is great. This is another paragraph that I think they want to write this as a negative, and I wrote my little note, yay. So the bill would quickly phase out hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits for climate and clean energy projects under the 2020-22 Inflation Reduction Act, including some incentives intended to last for another 10 years.
All
yay.
right.
We should stop doing that. We should not be subsidizing green energy, climate change issues, electric car infrastructure, solar, wind. We should not be subsidizing that.
Yeah. And actually, the second half of today's episode, Kathryn and I sit down with Sarah Montalbano and talk about what the big, beautiful bill does with those energy and solar and EV subsidies. So stay tuned for that.
Very interesting, and how some Republicans actually disagreed on whether or not we should have those subsidies in the bill, which I found
Well,
Very
and then,
interesting.
so they go into this analysis. Okay, the feds are going to stop doing the tax credits for these industries that they've had to prop up artificially. So that's going to be a loss of jobs to this wonderful industry in Minnesota, and we're going to lose all these jobs. Well, again, it's not the role of government. It's not the role of the federal government to try to prop up an industry that can't make it on its own. And it's not. We're not just giving them a head start. We've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
So long that we should know now that it's not a viable a business. It's not a viable part of our economy.
Yeah, they say Minnesota's solar industry alone, which employs about 5,000 people, could lose half of those jobs. If your industry is going to lose half of its jobs when you stop getting government subsidies, you are not a real industry that we should be trying to force on the public. There is clearly not the demand for the product that you are pushing on us.
But look at this man. He's so sad over his solar farm that he's... The front page of this article is some guy really forlornly looking at his solar panels like, oh no, my solar panels.
I'm going to lose my government
without the
tax
subsidies.
cuts because I put this on my farmland. Like, I get it, but I don't need to keep paying for that.
Sticking with energy, switching to another article. This is from the Fargo Forum. That the title of the article is "What Trump's Big Beautiful Bill Means for Minnesota," and they go through some of the similar things. But their energy section was worth talking about. They quote a woman modeling and analysis manager with Energy Innovation, and they go, comma, a nonpartisan energy and climate policy think tank. Now, I love this. So the Fargo Forum thinks that Energy Innovation is a nonpartisan policy think tank. Well, then,
sounds like us.
By God, the next article they write about American Experiment should say a nonpartisan policy think tank, right?
I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
No,
I'm
sure it will.
I mean, that every time
honest
we're
brokers.
right
They won't
wing,
call us a right
we're
wing.
conservative, which is fine. We don't shy away from that. We have a point of view. We
Just
are
be
a
consistent. I don't know.
center-right think tank. But this is insane to say that Energy Innovation. Look them up on the. Their whole mission is climate change, and it's very partisan. They get involved in elections. So that's the first thing. They just put her out as a source.
You've already lost me. Yeah.
And then her quote is that, I won't read the whole quote because she's talking about how terrible this bill is because wind and solar are some of the cheapest forms of energy today. Okay, stop the tape. Okay. Stop. If we had her saying that, we would yell, stop the tape. Wind and solar are some of the cheapest forms of energy. Yeah, they're the cheapest forms of energy if when wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, you don't have to spend money to provide electricity to everybody who needs it when that's happening. So that's what they do. They analyze wind and solar as how much it costs to produce a kilowatt of energy, ignoring the fact that most of the time we can't rely on wind and solar for all of our energy needs. So they don't count the cost of the baseload power needed to make wind and solar. So in the grid, they're the cheapest form of energy if you don't believe that they don't have to pay for it and the rest of the grid. So that is a myth that's all over the internet. That is something that needs to be debunked. And of course, then they go on to the same kind of stuff like, oh, we're going to lose all these jobs. Electricity prices are going to go up in Minnesota. No, they're not. If we would get rid of wind and solar and stop spending money on the grid, you're going to talk to Sarah about this in the next segment. Her paper, last two papers, you just have to read those papers to understand that's none of this is true, and that going back to baseload power, moving us to lifting the nuclear moratorium in Minnesota, top priority of the legislature.
Yeah.
So we can get into new nuclear, small nuclear, the future there. Perfectly the cleanest form of energy.
Yep.
And the cheapest when you look at their footprint, what they take up.
Yeah.
To deliver energy to power
and
our
reliable
economy. And
you're not relying on the wind to blow or for there not to be clouds in the sky.
Right.
So we just want to, the marketing, the messaging on the big beautiful bill. I mean, it's always that way. Something comes out and both sides go at it, but we wanted to spend some time. Stop the tape a little bit on a newspaper and the newspaper articles that are trying to move that message to the other way. So,
well, I do think though, since we are, as we discussed, like a non-partisan nonprofit, right? We have talked a lot about the Trump administration here and everything they've been doing. I think we should also note the big news that came out of the previous administration, the Biden administration this week. The son of the president former president, Hunter Biden actually did a really groundbreaking interview, I would say. And I think we should share it with our viewers just to be fair to both sides. So go ahead, Isaac, let's roll it.
Does crack cocaine make you act any differently? No. Is it safer than alcohol? Probably. People think of crack as being dirty. It's the exact opposite. When you make crack, what you're doing is you're burning off all the impurities so that they're combined with the sodium bicarbonate, which makes it smokable. That's all.
So that's what the Biden family's up to these days.
There you have it.
Glad we checked in on them.
Crack greater than alcohol.
If you were not watching on YouTube, some of the camera angles and the shots in that brief interview were absolutely wild. Most of them are pretty standard. They're sitting outside in a nice, green backdrop outside. Some of them, they get really shaky and go right in Hunter's face.
It really gives you the
really
feel
close
that
up.
everyone involved in this interview is on crack. Like Hunter, the interviewer, the guy filming, everyone's on crack. It's so funny.
How did
And
you
it's
find
probably
a
not
clip
worse than
where
alcohol.
the F-bomb wasn't dropped?
I know. It was hard. The F-bomb is dropped every other sentence in the rest of this interview. But that one, I found it was pretty clean for our viewing purposes. And if you want to learn more, he does explain how to make crack cocaine basically in detail. So if you're interested,
Really educational.
If I could just quote President Trump, sad. Sad.
Sad.
it's a little sad.
Wow, that was a great note to end on.
Thank you. That was my contribution to today's.
I really enjoyed it.
Conversation.
Bill, thank you so much for joining us for another weird edition of
Stop the Tape.
Stop the Tape,
Stop the Presses.
whatever we're going to call it. We're going to kick things over to us with Sarah Montalbano, now our Energy and Environment Policy Fellow here at American Experiment. As always, remember, guys, to like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the things to help us reach more people. We will see you next week. American Experiment is supported by thousands of individuals like you. To join the movement, go to www.americanexperiment.org and click the yellow donate button. From all of us here, thank you. Welcome back. Today we're joined in studio by Sarah Montalbano, American Experiment's Energy and Environment Policy Fellow. Sarah, it's so good to have you on again.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
How are you enjoying Minnesota this time around? We have very nice weather for you.
Yes, it's beautiful. Oh gosh, it is such a change from Tampa. Tampa has been muggy and it's been raining every day. It's been awful.
That makes me feel so much better.
Yeah,
about
Florida is not as the sunshine state. No, seriously.
I just
it's awful.
advocated to have this like kind of nationwide meeting of people from State Policy Network, a group that we're part of in Minnesota. I was like, you got to come to Minnesota in the summer. It's amazing. This was maybe a month ago. Oh my God, it was raining the whole time. It was horrible. It was in that week where it nonstop rained. So
biblical proportions.
yeah,
every day.
I was like, I'm sorry, my bad.
Well, Sarah, we want to talk to you especially about your new report, Shattered Green Dreams, the environmental costs of wind and solar. Before we get into that, the biggest question on my mind, and I think your mind as well, Kathryn, is the big, beautiful bill act was just passed not long ago at the time of this recording. And I want to know what happened with all of the wind and solar and green energy credits there was such strong debate around.
Yeah,
and I
there was
never
this
heard how it shook out.
fight amongst Republicans. I'm like, why are there still Republicans advocating for these tax credits for things like wind and solar? So will you tell us a little bit about what that fight was about? And then, what happened? What's even in the bill?
Yeah, absolutely. Backing out to the kind of big picture thing, wind and solar have been getting a production tax credit, which is awarded to them for the electricity they generate. And then there's also the investment tax credit, which is a specific percentage of their upfront costs, usually at least 30%, but you can get higher. And so this all came about in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. In reconciliation this time around, the one big beautiful bill did cut back a lot of those credits. What happened, and there was a lot of jockeying last minute, as these things are want to do. But what happened was the Senate put a little provision in there about foreign entities of concern, and that got struck out at the end, basically to prevent wind and solar from having a lot of materials from China and other sources that we can't account for that are harmful to national security. So that got struck at the last minute, and then sneaky language was inserted about the kind of placed in service provision. So the House version was supposed to basically require that these projects be constructed by 2027 in order to get these subsidies, which is great. That's a near immediate termination for wind and solar. What the Senate did was again, really sneaky because they basically made an exemption for projects that had a start to construction this year, and then they can finish up and be placed in service by 2030. And then these tax credits last for another 10 years. So we would have seen, and frankly, we probably would see these tax credits extend through 2040, which is nuts, quite frankly. So what happened yesterday that I've just covered is they've kind of scaled back this big, beautiful break for wind and solar. I'm very proud of that one.
Genius. Clip that.
You heard it here first.
Yes, yeah, I came up with it. But this break, the Trump administration put out an executive order yesterday to basically say, okay, Treasury, you need to come up with rules for what this placed in placed in service and this construction timeline looks like, because they don't want developers gaming the system. Currently, this construction is exceedingly easy to meet because you only have to put in, 5% of the project's overall costs, and you can do that by buying things that you can easily resell, like solar panels. So this is just one line that really negated a lot of this stuff. And now I think the administration's working in the ways that they can to scale this back. But it's been an interesting ride.
Well, it's interesting because Trump has always been kind of, as I see it, on the right side of this issue. And he's been very consistent since he was even running that. And a lot of people saw this with his kind of public fight with Elon Musk, I think, right? So while he's running this whole time, he said, I'm going to end electric vehicle subsidies. And that's what he really wanted to do. And some people speculate, obviously, that's what pissed off Elon. I don't know if that's true, but that did happen, right? That those subsidies for electric vehicles are no longer on the federal level?
Mm-hmm. I believe the clean vehicle tax credit is eliminated. That was the one that would give households, $7,500 for purchasing an EV. I know, right? I should have gotten in while the money was good.
No, my husband got this. It's crazy. It is. There was a huge tax credit. We still have a state tax credit, I believe. At least at the time, I know he got 2 separate tax credits. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, frankly, I'm sure your husband was already thinking about an electric vehicle anyway, and that's the problem with these credits,
right.
is it's going to people who would otherwise still be doing these things,
right.
and they're usually the top, percentage of households.
Right.
They tend to be wealthiher. And it's not low-income people that are going out and buying an EV.
Yeah.
typically.
That amount of money doesn't make it all of a sudden an affordable vehicle for anyone, So it's
Right.
such a silly thing to offer that much of a tax credit when it's no, you're just helping the people who are already going to get them.
Precisely. Yeah. And there's so much logic with that, with the IRA subsidies, is we're just encouraging malinvestment in wind and solar when they wouldn't otherwise be demanded on the grid for their unreliability and unaffordability attributes. These are not, characteristics that the market wants to encourage, but we have these incentives. So all that to say, it's definitely been interesting to see, and hopefully we will have better things on the horizon here soon.
Well, and that's the problem with, EV subsidies and incentives, trying to get people to buy electric vehicles. And also, forcing wind and solar as forms of energy where the demand and the logistics just aren't there. And I feel like that's those two issues are so closely related, because it's using the government to force the American public to use things they don't want to use, to rely on things that aren't reliable. It's so frustrating to watch this play out again and again and again. And I feel like finally we have an administration that is saying enough is enough. This is absurd.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see. I mean, obviously the de facto EV mandate was rolled back via executive action. And I don't know how much you all have been seeing, but it's just been a whirlwind on the energy and environment side of things. So yeah, it's very encouraging to see just some right sizing of the expectations. And one of the things in this executive order that is mentioned is actually the environmental costs and effects. So I'll let you cue me up there. But yeah, they talk about the environment in that, which I think is so far been kind of lacking from the discussion.
Right, because that's what a lot of that's what they say the reasoning is for all of these subsidies. Like, well, they're better for the environment, so it's good for government to give people these subsidies to adopt things like electric vehicles. But in your paper, you make the argument that they're really not all that much better for the environment. Let's see. Okay. People have long been calling these green, and by these I mean solar and wind in particular, right? Mm-hmm. These are the kind of like green energy that people will talk about. You argue they're not so green. Why is that?
Yeah, there's a lot of trade-offs here. And I know that all, sources of energy have challenges and benefits, but the challenges of wind and solar have not been sufficiently acknowledged. And most of those come from the fact that it is an intermittent and diffuse source of energy. It doesn't actually generate all that much electricity. So one of the consequences to that is land use requirements. Another is that you need a lot of materials to build these, all of these wind turbines and solar panels. Another is that they don't last as long as natural gas and coal plants. They'll last 20 to 25 years, but natural gas will last 40 and nuclear is 60 going on 80. And so you have to replace them 4 times as often. And of course, I think there's a lot of rosy optimism about recycling to solve these problems. And in my paper, I talk a little bit about why, recycling might help, but it's not going to be the cure-all to these material demands.
One quote from your report that I highlighted that actually shocked me. If the U.S. were powered entirely by wind turbines, the land area necessary would exceed 2 Californias.
Yes, yeah.
What? That doesn't sound very environmentally friendly.
No, it's amazing. And when we look at that, it's so much of the area required is the spacing between wind turbines, because you can't put them right next to each other or the wind pattern starts to change and they disrupt each other and then they don't produce electricity. And so I have some very shocking statistics on this this part, because I knew this going in, but I didn't realize quite how bad it really was. At least 10 times as much land area is needed for wind and solar to produce the same amount as a coal or natural gas plant. And that's even crazier when you think about nuclear, because a 1 gigawatt nuclear plant, and that's about as much energy to power about 750,000 homes.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of homes. That nuclear plant only needs 1.3 square miles. And to do the same thing, to generate as much electricity with solar, you would need between 45 and 75 square miles. You're surprised now. Wind turbines. Wind turbines are even worse. They need between 260 and 3,360 square miles. And I was thinking about this for an opinion piece, and I started Googling that latter figure. That's more than Delaware and Rhode Island put together.
Oh my God.
To just match the output of one nuclear plant.
Jeez.
So that has kind of predictable consequences for agriculture and other uses of land that we find worthwhile, because there's plenty of crops that won't grow in the space between wind turbines. There's plenty of crops that won't grow under solar panels, those that need sun themselves. And there's a lot of challenges to the kind of agrivoltaics solution that we see out there. So land use, I think, is really the crux of this one. And I think it's just fascinating.
I find it so hard to believe. And I get that, genuinely, realism and logic have just been pushed to the side in advocating for wind and solar solely. But I still find it so hard to believe that no one has sat down in all the years that people have been advocating for these, green energy sources. No one has run these numbers before. I mean, so do you think that people genuinely did not understand these very serious logistical drawbacks to wind and solar energy? Or do you think there are people out there who have known this for a really long time and are just keeping quiet for some reason?
I think it honestly hasn't been very considered, and maybe that's generous, but there was one study I cite in the report that was from 2022, I think, and it models about 10 global net zero scenarios. What would we need to fully decarbonize, meet all of these, IEA requirements to, keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, et cetera, et cetera. And what it finds is an at least doubling of the land area required for electricity generation, at least. And that's in a scenario that's still very heavy on natural gas and, those kind of fossil fuels. That still includes fossil fuels. One of these that really does the wind and solar project is actually between 500 million and 900 million hectares. And to put that 900 million in context, the United States is only about 980 million hectares. So we would need almost the entire land area of the United States in order to do global net zero. And, of course, that's all spread out among, all these various countries, but that is still a lot of land.
Laughable. It is.
A lot of hectares.
Yes, exactly. And I truly think that, people have started to sit down and calculate this. And even, coming from sources that are not particularly bearish on the idea of wind and solar, they still come to the same conclusions.
One of the things you mentioned was that there are kind of like positives and negatives to each type of, each way we're getting energy. And you have to look at the negatives of wind and solar, and a lot of people don't. But one of the things that I think maybe you hear on the left a lot is the potential huge downsides to nuclear. What do you say to someone who says, well, yeah, everything has upsides and downsides, but what about the potential for a huge nuclear catastrophe? That seems like such a bad downside that it's not worth it.
Sure. That's an interesting question because I don't really go into it in the paper, but I think there's a lot of first of all, the nuclear industry looks a lot different than it did, 40, 50 years ago. We have very modern processes and we have a lot of backups that, frankly, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission have put into place. So for that, we can definitely credit them. The other thing I would say is that a lot of what we would call the nuclear waste problem is actually, a recycling problem. And that's something that is really burgeoning in technology right now is deciding how that we can actually reuse this spent fuel because spent fuel is still 97% okay fuel, like can be still used. So it's a question of reprocessing. What's largely happened with nuclear fuel is that we don't have any place to permanently store it, and that's something you'll hear a lot. And that is kind of the federal government's issue right now, is that just that they haven't designated a site for this. But what I would argue is that we would probably like some of this material to be available for recycling because we frankly could have a fairly unlimited source of fuel here if we just learned how to recycle this properly. So that's a perspective that I think you might not hear from most people. I would also say, too, that many nuclear disasters have been kind of overblown. And I think we've taken an overly precautionary approach to nuclear energy. I think the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, just up until last year, wasn't required in its mission statement to consider any of the benefits of civilian nuclear. Their sole mission was safety and protection, which, makes a lot of sense, but they weren't allowed to consider any kind of trade-off. And one of the executive orders that the Trump administration put out there that we think is quite a good idea is directing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to actually reconsider some of the ways it does this risk assessment. They have a linear no threshold model, which basically means that any level of radiation exposure they consider dangerous and cumulative, which means that they truly have just failed to actually put in place any nuclear reactors. I think there's only been 2 built since the NRC was founded in 1976 or so. So it's really amazing because they have just simply prevented new nuclear through their regulation. And it's been really a dark age for nuclear up until recently.
So that change could be on the horizon coming soon. We're still just I mean, it's hard to believe. We're still just a few months into this second Trump administration. Things are moving real fast.
I can't believe it. Yeah, that's crazy.
What other policy changes would you like to see in the next 3 years? What do you think is likely even that we would see? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things Congress needs to be doing because I think we should all be concerned about executive power and the fact that executive power will be quickly reversed by a subsequent administration that doesn't agree. And, I think Congress can do a lot of things like, requiring that these same reports that, the Interior Secretary and the Energy Secretary give all those recommendations also to Congress so that Congress can decide on certain reforms. One of the things that didn't make it into the reconciliation bill was permitting reform. Where I am at least very excited about permitting reform, and I know Congress is too. That's, I think, one of the first things that they're going to get to, and I hope to see in the next 3 years, to make projects easier to build across the board. We really don't need to be stopping projects that have had years and years of environmental reviews and, been litigated over and over and over. So that's, I think, my top excitement and priority for the next few years.
How do you think that the conversation will change around the need for more electricity? Like, one of the things we talked about, and I know you mentioned here, is that the demand for electricity is so much greater with like data centers. If you look into how much electricity AI uses and how like these huge data centers you need for AI, it's really crazy. And so as that continues to grow, we're going to need, you say, much more mineral demands. And is that in general just going to change the conversation as AI develops, do you think?
It's already changed the conversation. And watching this over the past year has been fascinating because, frankly, no one knows how much electricity AI is going to take. There's been some reports that, all of these companies are, putting out feelers in a bunch of different states and they're only going to eventually site in one. There's some argument to that. But all of the projections we have are basically saying that electricity demand is going to grow for the first time since 2005 in 2 decades. And we are seeing this at the same time that we're retiring all of the reliable, well, not all of, I hope, but many of the reliable and dispatchable sources of electricity like coal and natural gas-fired plants. And frankly, what we've seen is that data center, tech giants, they know that they can't run these data centers on wind and solar. They know that because otherwise they would be going out and getting market bids for wind and solar facilities. But what you're overwhelmingly seeing is that they're reopening nuclear plants. Just a couple weeks ago, I think it was Meta. I think Meta is doing this. Microsoft's doing this one. Microsoft is reopening 3 Mile Island, and they were planning to, the unit that failed. And that's crazy. That is just not something anyone had on their bingo card, frankly. And they said just a couple weeks ago that they think they can do it by 2027, not 2028 as they originally planned, which is very exciting. And, of course, natural gas is expected to meet about 60% of the demand from data centers. And that's, I think, definitely because nuclear is going to take several years to permit, or even longer if it's a new nuclear build. But still, I think it's very exciting.
It'll be so interesting to watch too, because you're already seeing this kind of play out in Minnesota, just a couple years after they shut down Sherco, up in Becker, the coal plant. Just a couple years after that, you see Amazon, I think it was Amazon, about to come in and establish one of these huge data centers in northern Minnesota, because, they need to be in colder climates. Minnesota, no brainer. And, of course, at the last second, they weren't getting the support from the Walz administration. They weren't getting, I think it was maybe the tax breaks that they were hoping for. And so they went to another state, and it's just another missed opportunity for Minnesota after fumbling Sherco just a couple years before.
Yes, and Minnesota is on the cutting edge of nonsense here, frankly.
Stupidity, always.
There's the podcast title. Yeah. Cutting edge of nonsense.
And it's because this Amazon pullout was right just a couple days, I think, after the legislature decided on this data centers bill that imposes new restrictions on water usage. And yeah, it's not as favorable on the tax credits. And so, environmentalists are saying that they're not getting what they wanted. And, data centers clearly aren't getting what they wanted because they're not coming here.
Right.
And I think that's a huge missed opportunity, frankly, because North Dakota is very excited about data centers. And we will lose all of our data centers to there. And there are really fantastic ways for economic growth. And, I think we could do it, and we could do it better if we stopped shutting down our dispatchable resources here.
It'll be interesting too. I mean, looking at the debate over wind and solar as a whole, like, yes, there are the economic considerations, there's the practicality concerns, there's the, the land use issues, the critical minerals issues, which we're going to get into with you at a later date. I can't wait to talk about that. But then you also have, from a more environmentalist perspective, the impacts on wildlife that you're seeing. I mean, you talk in your report about the impacts on bird migration patterns and bats and even whales.
The whales
we saw in there. Got to save the whales. Talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really important issue, and I don't think that conservatives have done well leading in this area. I think we've very much allowed this discussion to only be that, fossil fuels aren't good for the environment and wind turbines and solar panels are. But frankly, there's a lot of concerns about sighting impacts. There's some evidence that the North Atlantic right whale, which only has about 360 individuals left in the world, is impacted by offshore wind turbines in the Atlantic coast. And there's been, a lot of debate, I think, internally within NOAA and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management about how to handle this. But they say there's no evidence that there is any lethal effects on whales. But they acknowledge a number of sublethal effects. All of this noise from construction is a problem for them. And it's disrupting their habitat and their migration patterns. And, frankly, at a population size that small, a single individual could be the extinction of the species. And that it breaks my heart, frankly. Birds on onshore wind turbines is a kind of different issue because a lot of the risk is direct collision, which is not a pretty sight at all.
Direct collision happened to a bird right outside our window in the office a couple days ago. And yeah, I feel bad for that guy.
Yeah. And of course, there's so many stadiums, buildings, like all of this is killing birds.
US Bank.
But, a lot of the problem with wind turbines is that this is happening to disproportionately happening to slower to reproduce species like birds of prey and shorebirds and water birds because these wind turbines are often sited on the top of a slope and they kind of try to catch the slope upward and gain lift, and then they directly collide. And so, we really, I think, are underestimating this. The scientific literature has a wide array of estimates for this. U.S. wind turbines are at least likely killing about 1 million birds a year. And, a lot of the studies that we have are from human searchers, either by automobile or on foot. And humans aren't that great at actually finding these bodies. And dog searchers are a lot better, and they count way more in the studies that are using dogs instead. So no one really knows, but I do think we should be concerned. Bats, too. There's the hoary bat is actually potentially heading towards extinction in the next 50 years, in part due to wind turbine impacts. And the study authors there actually do say, we should be looking at conservation efforts imminently to reduce mortality from wind turbines.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lane there for conservatives. I've seen that with people discussing like national parks and things like that as well. Conservatives, we want to conserve our environment and our animal populations. And so when it comes to messaging on these issues, I think we could do better, but are doing better also with things like the work you've done, of course.
Yeah, and I would leave the subject on just one last note that I think concrete environmental concerns like protecting threatened and endangered species and protecting habitats, I think all of that is incredibly conservative. And, these are people who care, like hunters and anglers and taking care, loggers, miners, people who are interacting with the daily interactions with their environment, and steward it very responsibly. And so I think there's an opportunity here. We didn't even talk about solar panels on this, but solar panels have their own host of problems with direct collisions, in part because their reflectiveness looks like a lake from above, and so they dive down and they collide. And so I think all of that is just so important to emphasize, because we can win on the environmental front too, because all of this is a trade-off that we don't talk about, and we should.
So, Sarah, what is next for this report? There's some buzz about a potential congressional hearing on some of these issues. I know you're having a lot of exciting conversations with the movers and shakers out in D.C. Tell us about it.
Thanks. That's maybe a little generous, but it's been a really warm reception, honestly, and I think there's so much room here too. The dialogue is shifting, and I think policymakers are ready to hear this kind of stuff. And my fervent hope for this report is that anyone in their local community who is overwhelmed by the idea of a wind turbine or a solar panel project coming to their town can pick this up and find the facts, and can really consider those trade-offs for themselves. And that was part of what inspired this report, is that I'm getting emails once or twice a week from people in that exact same situation, wondering what they can do. And the first thing you can do is be educated about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a valuable service that you're providing, and is part of the amazing work that we're doing here at American Experiment to put the facts in people's hands, in Minnesotans' hands every single day.
Yeah.
Well,
and save
Kathryn,
the whales.
Yes. And save the whales. We also got to save the whales.
Absolutely.
Sarah,
I believe that.
Thank you. I do believe that. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're interested, if you want to read her report, it's available at americanexperiment.org/reports, along with all of our other reports on energy, the environment, public safety, education, anything you can think of. Sarah, we'll have to get you back in here before too long.
Imminently.
While you're still in Minnesota. Imminently.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Imminently.
We'll do a whale episode.
Yes. I would love to. That would be great.
We'll see you guys next week. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, do all the things to help us reach more people.